Quarantine's been hard on a lot of people, myself included. But while everyone else picked up new hobbies, I dug deeper into my favorite universes and stories. Marvel, Doctor Who, Transformers, and so many more. But in my time digging, I unearthed a forbidden truth, too complex for human comprehension. A horrifying tangle of connections between universes. Franchise after franchise, all interwoven together in a chaotic, contradictory mess. And at the center of it all, one man, one character, who had inadvertently triggered this nightmare. A single being born of 3 worlds, yet exclusive to none. A being whose very presence has caused me endless turmoil. But who could it be? What kind of ethereal, omnipresent creature could have such a massive impact on the very concept of continuity itself? Who has that much power to cause a chain reaction that cancels out every story? It's been the death of me. I just can't wrap my head around it. Wait. Death of me? Head around it? Of course, it's you! It could have only ever been you! Death's Head, freelance peacekeeping agent from across the multiverse. Only you could break continuity in this way. Only you could connect these stories together at the very center. But how? Why? And where did he come from? Well, to answer that, I suppose we'll just need to dive deeper, yes? So in order to understand who Death's Head is, we have to go back to the mid-80s or so, back when a small little toy company named Hasbro bought the import license to a series of figures that could transform from real-world objects and vehicles into giant robots. Once they were brought into the US, these toys were rebranded as the Transformers. But Hasbro knew that just rebranding something as the Transformers wasn't really going to cut it. The medium of marketing was changing, and they needed to change with it. They'd had some success with G.I. Joe, giving it a cartoon and a comic book, so they decided to continue working with their partners from G.I. Joe, Marvel Comics, and together they created the now iconic Transformers cartoon, as well as, obviously, a Transformers comic book. But here's the thing, at the time, Marvel UK was very different from Marvel US, and as a result, occasionally they'd get completely separate versions of pre-existing comic books. And such was the case for the Transformers comics, which saw 2 versions, Marvel US Transformers and Marvel UK Transformers. And this was where we were first introduced to the concept of Death's Head. Death's Head is a freelance peacekeeping agent who was hired by Autobot leader Rodimus Prime to kill Decepticon leader Galvatron. Unfortunately, this involved Death's Head traveling back in time, which Rodimus really didn't want, so he tried to go stop Death's Head, but then that put him in Death's Head's crosshairs, and from then on, Death's Head became something of a reoccurring antagonist for the series, popping up occasionally to kill the Autobots or the Decepticons, or both, until eventually he murdered Bumblebee, then resisted the mind control of Unicron, the planet-eating god. So he very quickly became a fan-favorite character from the comic. And that's kind of where the trouble began, because Marvel UK saw Death's Head's popularity as an opportunity to expand. They were struggling to get some comic books off the ground and saw that if he could be used as sort of a crossover between these different comics, they might increase in popularity. There was a problem, though. So here's the thing about Marvel's multiverse. Even though Transformers was being produced by Marvel, it wasn't part of their mainline continuity, Earth 616. And because of that, Death's Head was still off in its own separate universe. But they wanted him to appear in other Marvel comic books. If they were going to do that, they need to find some way to bring him from the Transformers universe into Earth 616. So, how did they do that? Well, they decided to have him run into none other than the Doctor. God, I wish I was joking! As you may have guessed, Hasbro was not the only third-party company Marvel was working with. They were also working with BBC on Doctor Who comics. Except, here's the thing, they didn't just have it be this convenient, oh, Death's Head runs into the Doctor and then is dropped into the Marvel Universe. Instead, they decided to make it the most complicated they could have made it, by having Death's Head jump through an exploding time portal, which somehow blasted him into the Doctor's time vortex in his own universe, and then they collided, which somehow knocked them both into the Marvel universe, where the Doctor sent him to Earth in the year 8162. He hung out there for a little bit until he was hired to kill the Doctor. Then he tried to kill the Doctor, realized he didn't want to kill the Doctor, and then the Doctor dropped him off on top of the Baxter building in the present day, squarely set in Earth 616. But that's not even the end of it, because even after that, the Doctor was still involved in Death's Head adventures, including one where he tried to stop past Death's Heads from killing an upgraded future version of Death's Head and then had to wipe the past version of Death's Head's memory. Hey, Editor Wixel here. I don't know what I was talking about with past Death's Head killing future Death's Head or Death's Head 2. That isn't the story of Incomplete Death's Head. I'm not sure what I was thinking here. I think I was just rambling. They actually end up working together. Ultimately, I'm not entirely sure how I got that wrong, but I wanted to clarify it now because I thought otherwise it was going to cause problems. Sorry, thanks, carry on with the video. And then it was revealed that the Doctor was responsible for putting Death's Head in the Transformers universe in the first place. Why did they do that? Who knows, but they did. But here's the thing. So far, it's been messy, but understandable. If you spend a lot of time researching, it does eventually make sense. There's nothing entirely continuity breaking here. But the problem lies less with this and more with the fact that all three of these franchises have this incredibly nasty habit of crossing over with other franchises and each other. Take, for example, Transformers, which has become something of a serial crossoverer in the last couple of years, crossing over with all kinds of franchises like Back to the Future, G.I. Joe, The Terminator, Ghostbusters, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, even My Little Pony for some reason, which, side note, I'd love to spend time talking about the fact that My Little Pony characters are being involved in the affairs of actual war criminals. But the concept makes me too uncomfortable, so I'm going to instead move on to the fact that there's a version of the Doctor in the My Little Pony universe, which also makes me deeply uncomfortable, but it does serve as a pretty good segue to talking about Doctor Who, which has had its own fair share of crossovers, which include Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, because Douglas Adams incorporated several elements from his books into different episodes of Doctor Who, and Star Trek, thanks to an actual comic book crossover. But you know what's really funny? Guess what other franchises crossed over with Star Trek before? That's right, Transformers! But that's not all, because Star Trek's also crossed over with both Green Lantern and the Legion of Superheroes, both of which are from DC Comics. And don't even get me started on DC, which has had its own slew of crossovers. Looney Tunes, Scooby-Doo, Hellboy, Planet of the Apes, Power Rangers, Alien, Predator, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in 3 different continuities, and who could forget their numerous crossovers with Marvel, which has had its own fair share of crossovers. Phineas and Ferb, Archie, Invincible, and of course, the Transformers. Now, I know you're probably saying, but Wixel, you've already talked about the Transformers and Marvel connection. Why bring it up again? And technically, you're right. Except, as I mentioned, the Transformers universe is often its own separate part of the Marvel multiverse. It doesn't take place in Earth 616. Which is good because there's actually a different version of Transformers that is canon to Earth 616. This is the New Avengers and the Transformers, a 4-issue miniseries that canonizes the idea that IDW's first Transformers continuity takes place in Earth 616. And it isn't just me saying that, that was the full intention of the writers, even going so far as to canonize specific points in each comic's timeline in which they take place. On the Transformers side of things, it takes place in between the Infiltration and Escalation story arcs. For Marvel, it takes place in between the Breakout and Sentry story arcs. Not only that, but there's plenty of other evidence to suggest that this is supposed to be canon. Firstly, it ends on a cliffhanger suggesting that the Quinjet is supposed to be a Cybertronian. And on top of that, Tony Stark says he's been hearing rumors about transforming aliens for a while and even built an anti-Cybertronian armor specifically for this occasion. And it ends with Ramjet going off to do his own thing, leading straight into Spotlight Ramjet, where he's still doing his own thing. So clearly this was supposed to be a canon comic. There's so much evidence to make it fit within both timelines. Except, a couple of years after this, we got the All Hail Megatron story arc, in which Megatron and the Decepticons blow up New York and then take over the world.
Yeah, where were the Avengers for that? And actually, the same thing applies for when Optimus Prime annexed Earth into the Cybertronian Empire. You're telling me the Avengers weren't involved in that? And the same thing can be said for every Marvel crossover that happens every summer with some big universal threat. You never see a single Cybertronian in those, even though apparently every single alien race is supposedly supposed to be involved, and yet they aren't. So then, is this crossover not canon anymore? It can't be canon anymore. I mean, it has to take place off in its own separate, non-continuous storyline, right? In its own continuity or Earth or whatever. It can't actually fit in Earth 616. Except, in Last Stand of the Wreckers number 5, which is canon to Transformers' IDW continuity, we are introduced to Impactor's Autopedia article, which briefly mentions that he got the idea for his hook hand from a freelance peacekeeping agent that had been ricocheting from universe to universe after leaping through an exploding time portal. And if that's not enough, how about Lost Light issue 11, in which Rodimus says that if he dies, he wants his crew to hire a freelance peacekeeping agent with horns, detachable hand, and eyebrows that would make Rung jealous. This is obviously Death's Head! Because here's the thing, even though it says he's been hopping from universe to universe after jumping through an exploding time portal, that stopped being relevant as soon as he got to Earth 616. He's been stuck there ever since and can't travel to other universes anymore. So in order for this Death's Head to have met those versions of the Transformers, they have to be canon to Earth 616. And considering there's another crossover comic that 100% confirms they are sharing a universe, that makes sense. And that just means that every time they aren't crossing over, like All Hail Megatron, or Optimus's annexation of Earth, or every other Marvel crossover, those are the continuity errors, not the crossovers. Doesn't that seem insane? Death's Head is wrecking continuity for a second time! And it gets even worse, because Death's Head's head is on display in the Guardians of the Galaxy mission breakout ride at Disneyland, which is canon to the MCU. But that has its own level of questions. Number one, is it the same Death's Head? If it is, how did he get to that universe? He's stuck in Earth 616, or did the Doctor bring him to the MCU? That doesn't make sense. He can't travel through dimensions. He was only able to do that during the Death's Head crossovers because him and Death's Head tore a hole through the Doctor Who universe and the Marvel universe for a little bit, but that's all null and void now, because the Doctor actually sealed the holes between universes when he did that at the end of season 2 of the new series. So then it has to be a different Death's Head, right? But that brings up so many more questions. Death's Head was created as a multiversal singularity in a pocket dimension without any time. He's out of the multiverse in his creation. So where did this other Death's Head come from? Was he created by the same person? Was he inspired by the original Death's Head? That doesn't make any sense. And either way, that's ignoring the biggest question here. Who killed him? The only person that was ever able to kill Death's Head was a future upgraded version of his own self. So does that mean Death's Head 2 is canon to the Marvel Cinematic Universe? I really hope not. Death's Head 2 sucks. But then who else could it have been? Could it have been Galvatron or other Transformer? And I know you're saying, Wixel, obviously it's not the Transformers. They wouldn't put Transformers in the MCU. And normally I'd agree, but after seeing all of this crap, I wouldn't be surprised anymore. And you know, the absolute worst part of all of this? I've only been focusing on the crossovers that in some way tie back directly to Death's Head. If I stop worrying about that connection, things get so much infinitely worse. A matrix of leadership from Transformers appeared in Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Hedgehog is all three of those franchises have crossed over Mario, Super Smash Bros. Then in turn is crossed over with companies like Pac-Man, TMNT has crossed over with Power Rangers, Archie has had a crossover with Predator, has crossed over with Star Wars, with Alien and Max, Ralph has crossed over with Angry Mario, Sonic, Star Wars, Canonical, Mario, and Star Wars. Crossed over with Minecraft, crossed over with Captain Doom, Big Planet, Scooby-Doo's crossed over Mario, Sonic, Star Wars, The Addams Family, Scooby-Doo's crossed over with Godzilla, Scooby-Doo's crossed over with Star Wars, Dimensions is Ratings, Adventure Time has specific to the universe Max, Lego Batman the video game, and the version of Batman from the Lego Batman movie, Oz from King Kong, Lego movie and Gremlins, from Godzilla, I think, maybe, I don't know, what is that thing at the end? Star Wars, Batman movie also has villains from Doctor Who, and Lego Dimensions has also crossed over with Sonic the Hedgehog, Mission Impossible. And get this, also Doctor Who, which is really funny because Doctor Who has this whole thing about interdimensional travel, and one of the last times he did that was, get this, when he was visiting Death's Head. Do you see why this is a problem? Look. Each of these crossovers on their own is fine. In fact, I love most of the ones up here. But they can't all be canon. In fact, many of them actively negate each other's canon. For one thing, many of these crossovers actively contradict each other. The logic of one universe meeting the logic of another works fine enough on its own, but applying the logic of a third universe, that just doesn't work. So many of these make no sense if you take them into consideration with the broader connected universe. But the more important reason, and the more frustrating one, is the fact that many of these crossovers cease to matter as soon as they're over. Batman has this amazing crossover with the Ninja Turtles, and in it he learns the true power of family, learns to treat Damian with a little more respect and kindness, and likewise the Ninja Turtles learn more about the true nature of fighting crime. None of that's ever brought up again. Batman goes back to treating Damian like always, and the Ninja Turtles never once bring up, oh, that time with Batman. And so many of them are like that. We've already covered the Transformers and New Avengers thing, but it goes beyond just story stuff. Optimus learns about the true greatness and weakness of humanity, while Captain America learns about the horrors of the engines of war, and that stops mattering. Most of these stop mattering as soon as they're done. These crossovers amount to nothing outside of the crossover itself. And I know that's normal. I know that's fine. Self-contained stories are a thing. But doesn't that sort of devalue it? These are supposed to be grand, impactful meetings up between two of the most important ongoing stories we could imagine, and despite that, these ongoing stories continue to just never acknowledge that they had a greater discovery of the broader multiverse. It defeats the purpose, in a way. And I know we could all chalk this up to, oh, well, maybe it's just a parallel universe that has these crossovers. But in a way, doesn't that make it worse? Because then not only is it pretty much guaranteed we'll never get to see the results of that crossover ever again, but in a way it's also asking us to connect with versions of these characters we've never met before. All that does is devalue them further. But that can't be right. These can't be meaningless. Because if they don't matter to these characters, if these stories have no meaning, if these character arcs don't matter to the characters that experience them, that means they only matter to me. They only matter to me. Is that the point? Is the point of these not to matter to each other? I mean, the fact that these crossovers all exist, I can guarantee it wasn't because they were motivated by some grand, impactful, character-driven thing. I don't see how Ben 10 improves as a character because of the way he's involved in Minecraft. And yet they did it anyways, because they knew fans would like it. They knew I would like it, and you, and everyone that's ever watched or read or played any of these crossovers. Maybe canon is a sham. Maybe I've been thinking about this all wrong. Maybe I've been so focused on the exact canonicity and continuity of these stories that I've forgotten all about just how much fun each of them is. I mean, after all, so many of these have enough continuity errors on their own. How does it hurt to have a couple more? They don't need to fit perfectly in order to be canon, in order to matter. We know they happened. We know their value. We learned the lessons that these characters were supposed to learn. Because even when these crossovers are seemingly forgotten by the people involved, they're never forgotten by the people they impacted most. Us. Yes, it's nice when things line up perfectly and when they continue to be treated as canon for the rest of their continuities, but the true value of them comes from how much we enjoyed reading them. And maybe that's why I like Death's Head so much. Yes, all of this is great. All of the crazy, wild adventures, his insane, absurd history, that's all fun, but that's not why he's one of my favorite Marvel characters. He's one of my favorites because he's a fun, endearing, ridiculous character. Someone that I always have a blast reading. Yeah, it's confusing and ridiculous and absurd, but that doesn't devalue Death's Head. This mess doesn't devalue any one of these singular crossovers. All these do for Death's Head is make me love him more. It fits the absurdism of the character. It fits the absurdism of most of these. Most of these crossovers can't be canon. And yet, in their own way, they are anyways. Not because of some insane conspiracy about negating continuities, but because that stuff doesn't matter. And because the people to whom they do matter still treat them as such. These stories matter to me. I grew up with them. I'm the one that enjoys them, and I think a lot of people do. I think that's ultimately why all this matters, is because I want it to. We give these stories their meaning, including Death's Head. And because of that, canon or not, confusing or not, each of these stories matters. And each of these stories, in their own way, is still canon. And nothing like this could ever take that away from them. Yes? Except, of course, for Transformers and My Little Pony. Friendship is magic? More like friendship is dangerous. Why are you having a baking contest with war criminals? Especially when Shockwave literally wants to vor you.